She walked into the bank with a scholarship check and walked out with a policy named after her. But what happened in between? Let's just say some voices don't echo. They change the rules. Before we dive in, let us know, what time are you listening to this and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. It was one of those cool September mornings when the air smelled like leaves, but the sidewalk still held on to a little summer heat. Greystone always had that crisp quiet early in the week, like the town was waking up just a bit slower than usual. Leora Benton stood on the front steps of her house, fiddling with the strap of her backpack and trying to settle the small whirl of nerves in her stomach. She wasn't nervous because she'd forgotten something. She had everything: her school ID, her award letter, and that all-important scholarship check tucked carefully into a folder. It was more about what today meant. This wasn't a trip to the store or a visit to the library. She was walking into a bank on her own to handle grown-up business without her mom by her side. Inside the house, her mom was still at the kitchen table, reading through a client report, coffee in hand like always. Leora had watched her mother handle tough conversations and big decisions with the kind of calm most people only pretended to have. She admired that. But today, Leora had said, "Let me do this." Her mom looked up, half smiling. "You sure?" "I'm sure. It's just a deposit." A pause. "You've got your documents?" Leora patted her bag. "All in here. Check's in the front pocket." Her mom nodded but didn't say anything else. The silence said plenty. She was proud, but maybe a little uneasy too. Not because she didn't trust Leora to handle things. It was the world she didn't trust. But neither of them said that out loud. As Leora walked down the driveway, a breeze pushed past her legs and flipped the edge of her school skirt. She smoothed it down and picked up the pace, passing by the neat rows of houses with trimmed hedges and flag-lined porches. Greystone was nice, quiet, but that didn't always mean kind. The bank wasn't far, just a few blocks away, across from the town library and next to an old tailor shop that had closed down last spring. Fairmont Trust stood like a glass and stone statement, not towering like in the city, but tall enough to make you feel small walking in. She paused outside the front doors, looking at her reflection in the glass. Her blazer sat just right, shoes polished, hair in its usual low bun. She didn't look scared, but she felt exposed, like stepping into someone else's world, hoping they wouldn't notice she didn't quite belong. The automatic doors opened with a whisper, and the chill of the AC brushed over her face. Inside, everything smelled like fresh paper and faint cologne. The marble floors clicked under her shoes with every step. People stood in clean lines, quiet conversations hummed near the desks, and a woman in a pale gray suit handed out pens with plastic smiles. Leora waited patiently behind a tall man in a pinstripe jacket. He had a leather folder under one arm and a Bluetooth headset tucked into one ear. He didn't even glance back at her. When he stepped forward, she moved up to the counter. The teller glanced at her, blinked once, and smiled politely. Not warm, not cold, just, polite. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "I'd like to deposit this check into my savings account." Her voice felt smaller than usual, but it held steady. She handed over the folder. The teller took it, opened it slowly, and paused. There it was, that shift, the moment when curiosity turned into something else. His eyes went back to the check, then to her, then back again. He held it up to the light. Leora stayed quiet. She'd practiced this moment in her head. She'd imagined it going smoothly. A stamp, a smile, a receipt. Done. Instead, the teller looked over his shoulder and gave a little nod to someone in the corner office. Leora followed his glance. A woman stood behind the glass, arms crossed, lips pressed into a straight line. Her nameplate read, Marla Greaves, branch manager. Marla stepped out, heels tapping in an even rhythm. She didn't smile, just walked up, took the check from the teller's hand, and turned it over once. "A scholarship check?" she asked, tone clipped. "Yes, ma'am," Leora replied. "From the West Ridge Scholars Fund. All the documents are there." Marla didn't look at the papers. She looked at Leora, not at her outfit or her posture, but through her, as if trying to find a crack. "We've had a few issues lately," she said. "Fraudulent activity. Students coming in with questionable documents." I have my ID, Leora said quietly, handing it over. And the award letter. Marla didn't take them. We'll need to verify everything, she said. Please wait in the side lounge. It wasn't a request. It was the kind of instruction people gave when they'd already decided how they saw you. Leora nodded and stepped aside, trying not to let the heat in her cheeks reach her eyes. She sat down on one of the leather chairs by the potted plant near the window. Outside, the town moved like it always did, slow, familiar. But in here, everything had shifted. She wasn't just a customer. She was a question mark. She tried to settle her breathing, thought about her mom's voice when things got stressful, calm, collected, professional. That's what she needed to be. But inside, something tugged, like she was shrinking in a room that was getting bigger by the second. And that was how it began. Not with shouting, not with slammed doors, just a regular Monday, with too many eyes watching and too few voices speaking. The room didn't feel cold at first. Not in the way air conditioning usually creeps up your sleeves. It was something else. A stillness that crept in around the edges and stayed, like being watched but no one looking directly at you. Leora sat upright in the lounge chair, knees close together, folder still on her lap. She hadn't moved much since they told her to wait. It had been 15 minutes, maybe 20. Long enough to notice that the man who came in after her, the one with the silver cufflinks and an easy laugh, had already been helped. So had the woman in the tan dress with a toddler on her hip. They'd smiled, nodded, been thanked by name. No one had asked Leora if she wanted water. No one had told her how long the verification would take. She was just there, parked like an unopened box someone wasn't quite sure what to do with. She shifted slightly in her seat. The leather squeaked. A nearby employee glanced her way, then quickly turned back to their computer screen. Behind the glass, the branch manager, Marla Greaves, was back at her desk. Her posture was as straight as it had been earlier, but now she was holding Leora's scholarship check under a desk lamp, tilting it, tapping it with her pen. Reggie, the teller who'd first received her, stood beside her, arms crossed, an expression unreadable. Leora couldn't hear them, but she didn't need to. She knew the look, the lean in, the lowered voice, the pointed glance back at her. A quiet coil of something twisted in her chest. Not quite fear, not quite anger. Just that familiar burn of being questioned without being spoken to. She opened her folder again, as if rechecking that everything was still in there. The check, the printed award letter, her ID, all intact, all correct. She hadn't imagined this. You did everything right, she whispered to herself, voice barely above breath. Still, her stomach turned. Just then, a woman in a deep navy blazer walked past the lounge and paused, eyes flicking to the side. She wore a scarf around her neck, a soft print of blue and cream, and her shoes made a quiet, even sound on the marble floor. She looked to be in her late 30s, calm face, observant eyes, like someone who'd spent years learning when to speak and when not to. The woman didn't say anything, just took a seat on the couch opposite the coffee machine and pulled a small leather notebook from her tote. Leora glanced at her briefly, then looked away. She hadn't seen the woman before. A minute passed. Then quietly the woman stood, walked over toward Leora's side of the lounge, and tapped the silver watch on her wrist. Her voice was soft but steady. Been here long? Leora blinked. A while, yeah. The woman nodded slowly, then leaned in just enough for her words to only reach Leora's ears. You didn't do anything wrong. I saw how they looked at you. She didn't wait for a response. Stay calm. Don't move. Let them show who they are. And just like that, she turned and walked back to her seat. Leora stared after her. Her throat tightened. But not from shame. From something else. Relief, maybe. Validation. Someone else had seen it. She sat back in the chair, folded her hands in her lap. Her back straightened just a bit more. The air didn't feel any warmer, but it felt less heavy. Across the room, Marla stood up and walked to the far hallway, a manila folder tucked under her arm. She didn't look Leora's way, but her shoulders were stiff, and the way she clutched the folder felt tense. Leora noticed, and so did the woman with the scarf. There was something about the way Marla disappeared down that hall. Purposeful, rushed, like someone trying not to be followed. The woman in the scarf pulled out her phone, opened her notes app, and started typing. Leora watched her fingers move. Not fast, not nervous, just careful. She didn't know who that woman was or why she had stepped in. But she knew one thing with certainty. She wasn't invisible anymore. And whatever this was, it wasn't just a delay. It was deliberate, quiet, measured, and someone else had finally acknowledged it out loud. Outside, the sun shifted, catching the glass doors just enough to reflect her image back at her. She looked the same. But inside, something had changed. Soraya Trent had been in enough terminals, lounges, and hotel lobbies to know when something didn't sit right. It was in the way people moved, or didn't, in the words they chose, and even more in the ones they left out. Years in the sky had sharpened her to moments like this. Moments where silence stretched too long, where certain kinds of customers got all the smiles and others got all the doubt. She hadn't planned to stay long at the bank, just a quick visit to finalize some changes to her retirement account while she had a few days off. After flying back-to-back routes from Houston to Chicago, Greystone was supposed to be her pause button. But there was something about the girl. She'd noticed her the moment she walked in. School uniform, folder clutched close, head held high. Soraya had caught the confidence in her stride, the kind young people wore when they were trying to prove, mostly to themselves, that they belonged. It was the same walk Soraya remembered having when she was Leora's age, back when people only saw her as someone's assistant, never the one in charge. That confidence had started to unravel the second Marla Greaves entered the room. Soraya had seen it before, on flights, in business class check-ins, at car rental counters. The tiny shift that happened when someone in a suit suddenly decided you were a problem instead of a person. It didn't take yelling or obvious slurs. It was subtler than that. Cold professionalism, prolonged pauses, questions that didn't need to be asked but were asked anyway. She didn't want to assume, but she also didn't want to pretend. Something was off, and the girl, Leora, as she'd seen on the folder, was being held in limbo for no good reason. Soraya had waited a while before approaching her. She didn't want to alarm the child, but the longer she sat there, the harder it became to ignore the familiar ache in her chest. That ache she got whenever she remembered the flight to Atlanta, where a young woman, not much older than Leora, had been asked to move from her assigned seat because a frequent flyer didn't feel comfortable next to her. Soraya had said nothing back then, not out of agreement, but out of protocol, out of fear, and afterward she'd hated herself for it. Not again. So when she walked past Leora in the lounge and paused to say what she did, it wasn't rehearsed, it was honest. You didn't do anything wrong. I saw how they looked at you. Stay calm. Don't move. Let them show who they are. She saw the flicker of surprise in the girl's eyes. The kind of surprise that comes when someone finally names the thing you were trying not to admit was real. Soraya didn't need a thank you. She just needed Leora to know she wasn't imagining it. Back at her seat, Soraya opened her small notebook and jotted down a few things. Time of arrival, the manager's behavior, the order of customers being served. She wrote in shorthand, a habit she'd picked up in crew training years ago. Nothing fancy, just facts. She was used to writing incident reports. This one wasn't official, but it felt just as important. Tapping her pen lightly against the page, she took in the scene. Marla had disappeared down a hallway with a folder. Reggie, the teller, was back at his station, typing something but glancing nervously toward the side lounge every so often. Leora hadn't moved much, but her posture had changed. She wasn't folded in on herself anymore. She was watching. Good, Soraya thought. That meant she was still fighting. The bank had quieted down a little. Fewer customers. A calm between the next wave. It gave Soraya a clearer view of the room. And that's when she noticed something odd. A man in a gray suit, who hadn't been there earlier, stood near the far wall by the glass meeting room. He wasn't talking to anyone, just standing, facing away from the counter, looking through his phone. Soraya didn't recognize him at first, but there was something about the way he held himself. Businesslike, confident, careful. Then she saw Marla reappear, walking briskly toward him, with a manila folder in hand. They didn't shake hands. They didn't sit. They just exchanged the folder with a few hushed words. It was fast, barely a minute. But Soraya knew how much could happen in a minute. especially when someone didn't want to be seen. She tilted her phone slightly and tapped the voice memo app. Not to record words, there were none clear enough, but to capture the timestamp. She noted the moment. Something in her gut told her this wasn't just about a girl and a check. It was more. Back in her notebook, she added a line. 12:49 p.m. Manager passes folder to unknown man. Gray suit. Interaction brief. No eye contact with staff. She closed the notebook and looked over at Leora again. The girl was staring out the window now, jaw clenched, hands still in her lap. The sun had shifted across the marble floor, casting thin shadows behind every chair. And for a brief second, Soraya saw herself again. Years ago, sitting quiet, watching things happen, wishing someone had said something sooner. She wasn't going to let this day become another regret. Not this time. Soraya didn't move for a while. She sat with her notebook closed in her lap, thumb pressed against the soft edge of the leather. Her eyes weren't on her phone, or the entrance, or the clock behind the counter. They were fixed on the pattern unfolding, one she had seen before, dressed up in different uniforms, tucked behind different counters. A young black girl, full of promise and preparation, walked into a place with all the right documents, and somehow still didn't qualify as trustworthy. The moments were subtle but undeniable. One customer, a middle-aged man in khakis and a golf shirt, had come in after Leora. He was greeted warmly, called "Sir" before he even reached the counter, and left with a printed receipt in under 5 minutes. The woman who followed him, with silver-streaked hair and a tote bag from the farmer's market, got a smile and a "take care now" as she stepped out. Meanwhile, Leora sat motionless in the same corner chair, as if the whole system had quietly agreed to hold her in place. Soraya jotted down the order of customers, noting the timestamps from the wall clock. She didn't need names, just the pattern. She wrote in clean, firm lines. Customer 3, arrived 12:56 p.m., white male, assisted within 6 minutes. Customer 4, arrived 1:04 p.m., white female, completed request by 1:13 p.m. Customer 5, Leora Benton, arrived before 12:30, still unassisted. She didn't add emotion to the notes. The facts spoke louder than opinions. Then just as she was flipping to the next page, something caught her eye again. Marla Greaves was back, but this time her steps were sharper, clipped. She moved toward the hallway with her phone pressed tightly to her ear, her voice low, her free hand clenched at her side. Soraya couldn't hear what was being said, but the way Marla paused before turning into the corridor, shoulders tense, lips pinched, spoke volumes. Something was shifting. Leora, across the room, hadn't noticed. She was still facing the window, but her eyes weren't following anything outside. Her gaze was inward now, fixed on whatever thoughts were keeping her steady. Soraya took a breath. She didn't want to overstep. She wasn't family. She wasn't law enforcement. She was just a woman with a notebook and a sharp memory for when things didn't line up. But there was something else now, a possibility. She tapped the side of her phone, hesitated, then opened her contacts. She didn't know Leora's mother personally, but the name on the folder, Marin Benton, wasn't unfamiliar. In fact, it stood out. Back during Soraya's stint flying corporate charters, she'd once served on a flight where a woman named Marin Benton had given a talk about ethical finance. Professional, composed, respected, and black. Soraya had remembered her not because of what she said, but because of the way a group of men in expensive ties listened to her without interrupting. Maybe it wasn't the same woman, but maybe it was. She typed the name into her browser and found it instantly. Marin Benton, CEO of Benton and Company Financial Strategies. Based right here in Illinois. Public profile. Contact link. Soraya clicked. A receptionist answered after 2 rings. Good afternoon, Benton and Company. I need to speak with Marin Benton. It's about her daughter. May I ask who's calling? Tell her it's Soraya Trent, and that I'm calling from Fairmont Trust Bank. It's urgent. There was a pause on the line, the kind that stretches long enough to make you wonder if you've overstepped. Then a click. A new voice came through, low, calm, and serious. This is Marin Benton. Soraya stood from her chair, notebook still in hand. I believe your daughter is being treated unfairly. I've been observing for over an hour. I don't think it's random, and I don't think it's just poor service. Another pause. Then Marin's voice, firm but steady. Is she all right? She's not hurt, Soraya said. But she's not okay either, and I think there's more going on than just a deposit delay. Send me the address. I already have. Soraya ended the call and exhaled slowly. Her hands were steady, but something inside her buzzed like an engine left running too long. She sat back down, scanning the room. Marla hadn't returned. Reggie was now talking quietly with another employee, both of them occasionally glancing toward Leora. Soraya didn't like the look of that. She picked up her notebook again and began documenting the interaction between the staff. Posture, tone, eye contact, or the lack of it. She'd been silent before, years ago, on flights where women like Leora were shushed or shifted or ignored. She'd buried those memories under professionalism and routine, told herself she was doing her job, but today she wasn't working. She was watching, and finally she was writing it all down. Leora had counted the ceiling tiles twice. She wasn't doing it on purpose. It was just something to keep her mind busy while time dragged by. 8 rows across, 12 going back. A soft hum buzzed through the vents, blending with the occasional beep from the teller machines. It was the kind of background noise people tuned out when things were normal. But for her, sitting in that quiet corner with a folder clutched to her lap, every sound felt magnified. She wasn't sure how long she'd been there now. 45 minutes? Maybe more. Her phone, of course, was still in her locker back at school, where she'd left it during science class. It had seemed like a smart idea then. She didn't want distractions while she was handling something this important, but now that decision felt like a mistake. She could have called her mom. She could have at least texted. She shifted in her chair, trying to make herself smaller. But no matter how she sat, she couldn't get comfortable. Her legs were starting to cramp, and the edge of the folder was digging into her forearm. Still, no one had come over. She glanced again toward the front counter. Reggie, the teller from earlier, had returned to his workstation, his eyes fixed on the screen like he didn't know she was still there. But she knew he did. He'd looked at her, just for a second, a few minutes ago. And then he'd quickly looked away. That stung more than anything. Marla Greaves hadn't returned either. The hallway where she'd disappeared had gone quiet, and even though the bank had started to clear out, no one had come to speak with Leora. No check-in, no apology, no update. She wasn't sure what she'd done to deserve this kind of silence. In her mind, she replayed everything again. The moment she walked in, the smile she tried to give the teller, the way she'd said, "Good morning," with as much confidence as she could muster. She'd been polite, prepared, respectful, everything she'd been taught to be. But it hadn't mattered. The thought sat heavy in her chest, thick and tight like cold syrup. Her mother always said the world wasn't fair, but that didn't mean you let it change who you were. Hold your head up, even when it's heavy, she used to say, especially then. But holding your head up was harder when it felt like no one wanted you there to begin with. Leora's fingers tightened around the folder. The scholarship check was still inside, proof that she had earned something real, something meaningful. But to everyone else in this room, it might as well have been blank paper. She started to stand, just to stretch, just to move. But before she could fully rise, Reggie's voice called out, not to her, but to someone behind the counter. Hold on, I'll check with Marla. Then he disappeared down the hallway, and Leora sat back down. So they did remember she was here. A few minutes passed. Then another employee came by and offered a clipboard to a man seated nearby, someone who'd walked in 20 minutes after Leora. The man accepted it with a smile, filled out a few boxes, and within minutes was ushered into one of the glass offices. She hadn't been offered a clipboard. She hadn't even been offered eye contact. From the other side of the room, Soraya Trent watched carefully. Her notebook was still in her lap, though now she'd stopped writing. She was studying the whole scene, how staff avoided looking in Leora's direction, how service had slowed for certain people and sped up for others. Soraya had worked in the skies long enough to know when an environment shifted. Something was happening here that went beyond bad customer service. It was intentional, not loud, but real. She caught Leora's eye for a moment. The girl looked away almost instantly, but not before Soraya saw the flicker of something behind her gaze. Not tears, not anger. Just exhaustion. The kind that came from being patient for too long. Back in the hallway, Reggie returned, alone. He walked past Leora's seat without saying a word. No update, no nod, nothing. That's when it hit her. They weren't just ignoring her. They were hoping she'd go away. The realization didn't spark outrage. It brought something colder, something quieter. She understood now. This wasn't about questions. It was about sending a message. You don't belong here. Not with that face. Not with that name. She glanced down at the folder again, her name printed neatly in black ink on the cover. Leora Benton. Just 2 words. But somehow, too much for this place. She didn't cry. She didn't shift in her seat. She just sat there, hands folded over her lap, jaw tight, shoulders squared, and waited. Again. But this time she was no longer waiting for their permission. She was waiting for her moment. From the corner of the room, Soraya could feel the tension humming like an old refrigerator motor. Constant, low, and undeniable. She'd been still for nearly an hour now, watching the pattern stretch longer, clearer, louder. Leora wasn't being overlooked. She was being delayed on purpose. Soraya had seen enough. She flipped open her notebook again and reviewed her notes, her handwriting as steady as her breath. In training, they always said, observe first, record later. And when you record, be precise. Facts can't be argued the same way feelings can. But something told her that even facts might not be enough today. She tapped her phone, opened her browser, and returned to the company profile she'd pulled up earlier. There it was, Maren Benton, founder and CEO of Benton & Company, Financial Strategies. A face that radiated grace with a hint of steel in her eyes. A woman who, like Soraya, had built her career in rooms that weren't built for women like them. She dialed again. This time the line connected faster. This is Maren. Soraya stood up from her chair, her voice quiet but direct. Your daughter is still here. Nothing's moved. No one's explained anything. And it's getting worse. A pause, then a sharp inhale on the other end. Thank you, Maren said. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Soraya ended the call, returned to her seat, and for the first time that day, allowed herself to lean back. Across the room, Leora still sat motionless. But there was a difference now. Something in her posture, a stiffness that wasn't fear anymore. It was resolve. Soraya recognized it. She'd carried that same look into pilot lounges and boardrooms and courtroom depositions when flight incidents turned political. This wasn't the kind of day you forgot. Inside the hallway, Reggie was speaking with Marla again. The branch manager's voice was no longer hushed. Through the glass, Soraya could see her pacing. She was holding her phone tight, too tight, and her other hand was clenched at her side. Marla's lips moved quickly, her brow drawn into a tight arch. Then she nodded to Reggie, said something short, and turned her back toward the office. The conversation hadn't gone how she wanted. That much was clear. Back at the counter, Reggie looked shaken. He tapped nervously at his keyboard, glanced once toward Leora, then immediately looked away. Something was unraveling. Soraya made a final note in her journal. 1:23 p.m. Marla visibly distressed. Reggie showing signs of tension. Possible internal disagreement. The moments ticked by. A woman near the front door glanced at Leora and offered a quick smile. Polite, unsure. But no one approached her. No one apologized. No one even asked if she needed anything. It was like she'd been set aside, like a customer service error that no one wanted to claim. Then, as if on cue, the glass doors slid open. Maren Benton entered the bank with the kind of presence that didn't need announcing. She wore a slate gray coat, tailored at the waist, and low heels that clicked against the marble in a rhythm as even as her expression. Calm, measured, unmistakably in control. Reggie saw her first. He straightened. Then another employee near the front whispered something under their breath and nudged a colleague. Marla stepped out of the hallway just as Maren approached the counter. Their eyes met. Maren didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. I believe my daughter has been waiting here without cause, she said, tone flat, but with weight behind every syllable. And I believe you know exactly who she is. Marla's mouth opened slightly. Mrs. Benton. Dr. Benton, Marin corrected gently but firmly. If that still matters here. The air in the lobby changed. Soraya stood, slowly stepping forward. She didn't speak right away, just reached into her tote and pulled out her notebook. Her voice was clear, firm. I've been here since before noon. I've documented everything. The delays, the interactions, the customers who came in and were helped ahead of her. Marla's composure wavered, just enough for her hand to rise to her collar. She adjusted it, an involuntary motion, her fingers twitching. I also witnessed you handing a folder to a man who is not an employee of this bank, Soraya added. That folder was marked internal strategy. Marla's throat moved in a small swallow. I don't know what you think you saw. I know exactly what I saw, Soraya replied. Marin turned to Leora, who had stood now, her eyes on her mother but her jaw still firm. You okay? Marin asked. Leora nodded. I am now. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Marin looked at Marla again. This isn't just about poor judgment. It's about ethics. And you use my child as cover. That's a decision that doesn't disappear just because you lower your voice. The silence in the lobby was complete now. Even the security guard had stopped shifting his weight. Marla stood frozen. Her face didn't crumble, but it changed. Eyes darting, hands still. She didn't look angry. She looked exposed. Reggie turned away, pretending to busy himself, but his ears were burning red. Soraya glanced at her watch. It was 1:37 p.m. Marla finally said, almost whispering, We can discuss this privately. Marin gave a small nod. Of course, but just know, what happens next will not stay quiet. She reached out and placed her hand gently on Leora's back, and together they walked past the counter, past the hush that had filled the room, and toward the truth that was no longer hiding behind glass. Leora had never been inside a conference room like this before. Not one that felt so quiet you could hear the stitching in the chair seams. The air smelled like old printer ink and something faintly floral, the kind of scent meant to be comforting, but too artificial to actually work. She sat at the far end of the table, her mother beside her, hands folded, eyes forward. Across from them, Marla Greaves, posture tight, lips drawn into a line too straight to be calm. The blinds were half drawn, slicing sunlight across the oak table in clean lines. A half-full pitcher of water sat untouched in the center. Marin didn't waste time. Before you say anything, she began, I want to be clear. We're not here to listen to excuses. We're here to talk about accountability. Marla opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her fingers tapped against the armrest, rhythmic, involuntary. A tell. Leora could feel the air shift, like the first roll of thunder before a storm. She wasn't used to seeing adults uncomfortable in this way. Not the ones who usually held the power. It was new, a little terrifying, but also clarifying. You isolated a minor without proper cause, Marin continued. You withheld communication. You delayed her transaction far beyond reasonable verification, and you used her presence to conduct what appears to be an unauthorized exchange of confidential material. Marla blinked, her voice smaller than before. I acted on protocol. You acted on prejudice, Soraya said from the corner of the room. She stood now, notebook in hand, her tone even but not soft. And I have the notes to back that up. Leora turned to look at Soraya. Really look this time. She hadn't known who the woman was when she first saw her. Just someone kind with a quiet voice. But now she realized. She wasn't alone because someone had been watching all along. Someone who chose not to turn away. Your behavior isn't just a personnel issue, Marin added. It's a systemic one. And the fact that you thought you could get away with it tells me just how deep that system runs. Marla's gaze shifted. Toward the blinds. The water pitcher. Anywhere but at the girl she'd tried to make disappear. I've worked here for 18 years, she said finally, voice brittle. Do you think I wanted this to happen? Do you think I set out to make your daughter uncomfortable? Leora spoke before her mother could respond. I don't think you set out to make me feel anything, she said quietly. I think you didn't think about me at all. That landed harder than any accusation. Marla flinched slightly. not in fear but in recognition. Marin stood. We'll be expecting a full response from corporate, and we'll be following this not just as clients, but as citizens who believe in equal access, regardless of who walks through the door. Marla stood too, a bit slower, her voice catching just slightly. You don't understand what it's like, she muttered, to be watched, to be doubted. Every day, I've worked too hard to lose everything. You didn't lose it today, Marin said. You started losing it the day you decided someone else's face meant more risk than yours. Leora felt something shift in her chest, like a knot loosening. Not completely gone, but less tight. She hadn't realized how much she'd needed to hear that. Marla turned and walked out of the room, her footsteps just a little too fast. The door clicked shut behind her. Leora sat back in her chair. Her mom reached over and gently took her hand, squeezing once. Soraya returned to her seat, crossing one leg over the other, notebook still in hand. No one said anything for a moment. And then, for the first time since she stepped into the bank that morning, Leora smiled. Not because things were fixed, but because they had finally been named. The silence she'd been trapped in all day had cracked, not shattered, not screamed through, just enough to let the truth out. Back in the lobby, things looked almost exactly the same. The marble floor still gleamed beneath the overhead lights. The potted plants still stood tall and slightly dusty in their corners. The reception desk hummed with quiet typing. To any outsider walking in, nothing seemed out of place. But for Leora, stepping out of that conference room with her mother and Soraya behind her, everything felt different. There was a quiet that wasn't about peace. It was the kind of silence that follows when something heavy has been dropped, and no one's quite sure how to pick it up. Customers turned to glance at them. A few employees did too. Some curious, some nervous. None said a word. Leora walked forward slowly. She wasn't trying to make a scene, but she wasn't shrinking back either. Near the front, a tall man in a suit, someone who hadn't been there earlier, stood from one of the consultation desks. He looked directly at Marin, extended his hand with polite professionalism. Dr. Benton, thank you for coming. I'm Eldon Pierce, Regional Compliance Director. Marin shook his hand firmly. I trust you've been briefed. I have, Eldon replied, glancing quickly at Soraya, then at Leora. And I've reviewed some of the documentation your witness has already provided. He nodded toward Soraya, who stepped forward and handed him her notebook. I've logged every moment, she said, from 12:16 p.m. until now. Customer order, staff interaction, specific details about Ms. Greaves' handling of the check, and the off-record exchange with the unidentified man. Eldon didn't question a word. He took the notebook, opened it, and began flipping through the pages. His brow furrowed slightly as he scanned the notes. Then he looked up. This branch will be placed under immediate internal review. Ms. Greaves has been relieved of her duties pending formal investigation. I'll be reaching out to your office, Dr. Benton, to coordinate with your legal team. No, Marin said plainly. You'll be reaching out to my daughter. Leora blinked. Eldon hesitated. Excuse me. Marin gestured gently toward her. This didn't happen to me. It happened to her. And if your institution has any intention of understanding how to correct it, you'll start by listening to the one person you ignored the longest. Leora didn't move, but inside something swelled, quiet and steady like the tide. Eldon gave a small, respectful nod. Understood. Just behind them, Soraya's lips pressed into a thin line, pride softening her expression. She didn't speak, but the look in her eyes said plenty. As the group moved toward the main exit, Leora's eyes drifted back across the lobby. Same chairs, same cold floor, same desk where her check had been questioned like it was a lie. But she wasn't the same girl who had walked in. As they reached the door, the security guard who'd stood idly all afternoon suddenly shifted. He stepped toward them, not aggressively, but with an awkward stiffness, like someone unsure what to do now that the rules had changed. Ma'am, he said, addressing Marin. But before Marin could respond, Leora turned slightly, her voice calm and clear. We're good. Thank you. The guard nodded once, stepped back. Nothing more needed saying. Outside, the afternoon had stretched into early evening. The sun hung lower now, casting golden lines along the sidewalk. Everything looked warmer than it had a few hours ago, but the air still carried that same crisp snap of fall. They stood there for a second, just breathing. Maren looked at her daughter. "You all right?" Leora nodded. "Yeah, I think I'm more than all right." Soraya adjusted the scarf around her neck, her eyes still scanning the windows behind them. "I called because something felt wrong," she said. "But you," she turned to Leora, "you did something about it. That matters." Leora looked down at her hand, still gripping the folder. It wasn't just a check anymore. It was something bigger, a receipt for a moment she had survived and shaped. "Will you be okay?" Leora asked Soraya genuinely. Soraya smiled, small, tired, but real. "I already am." They stood there for another minute before heading to the parking lot. No one said much, but none of them needed to. When Leora glanced back at the building one last time, she didn't feel small anymore. She felt seen, heard, and maybe for the first time that day, she truly felt like she belonged. The next morning, the sun crept over Greystone with the kind of sleepy calm that made it easy to forget what had happened the day before. Birds chattered in low branches, coffee shops clicked open, and yet, inside Fairman Trust's regional headquarters, the air was tight with something far less peaceful. Eldon Pierce stood at the end of a long table in the executive conference room. His blazer was crisp, his expression unreadable. He was flanked by two senior HR representatives, a legal advisor, and the branch compliance officer. On the other end of the table sat Marla Greaves, her hair tied back tighter than usual, hands folded too neatly in front of her. Her eyes darted between documents, but it was clear she wasn't reading. "This meeting is not disciplinary in nature," Eldon began, "though the outcome may result in such action. We are here to review the events of yesterday as reported by multiple parties, including a third-party witness." Marla didn't speak. Her fingers drummed once on the table, so softly it was barely audible, but her stillness was tight as thread. Eldon glanced at a folder in front of him. "Ms. Greaves, do you recognize this check?" He slid it forward. Leora's scholarship check, now scanned and logged in the incident report. Marla nodded once. "Yes. And this manila folder," he continued, placing another envelope beside it, "was confirmed by security footage to have been handed from your possession to an unidentified man at 12:49 p.m. Marla's throat moved. "He's a consultant, a partner from Meridian Financial." Eldon didn't blink. "Meridian Financial is a direct competitor of Dr. Maren Benton's firm. That has nothing to do with the check," she said, her voice picking up just slightly. "The child came in with a large deposit. We were instructed to be cautious with unverified funds. That's not unusual." A beat of silence. One of the HR reps spoke up then, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and a pinched frown. "What about the documented sequence of service delays? The customers who were assisted before her, despite arriving later?" Marla's jaw tightened. "There were other factors. We have high-net-worth clients who require prioritization." "And did you know," Eldon interjected, voice even, "that this particular young client was the daughter of one of our largest institutional partners?" Marla's eyes flinched at the word daughter, not in surprise but in realization. "No," she said, "not at the time." "But it wouldn't have mattered, would it?" Soraya's voice floated in from the doorway. Everyone turned. She entered calmly, notebook in hand, followed by Maren and Leora. Eldon didn't stop them. He'd already invited them. "This meeting needs to include all perspectives," he said simply, offering Soraya a seat. Marla shifted, eyes narrowing. "This isn't procedure." "No," Maren said as she sat. "Neither was what happened to my daughter." Leora said nothing. She sat beside her mother, her folder in her lap again. But this time, she wasn't clinging to it. She was holding it like it belonged to her, as it always had. "I took notes," Soraya said, sliding her pages across the table. "Every moment, every skipped customer, every time no one looked at her." Eldon scanned the pages. "These are detailed." "I was trained to notice patterns," she replied. "I spent 20 years in the air. You learn to see what others pretend not to." Marla crossed her arms now. "So this is a tribunal, based on feelings and patterns?" Maren raised a brow. "This is a response to accountability being ignored. You don't need emotion to see what you did. You need eyes." Marla turned to Eldon, voice cool. This is about perception, not policy. I followed security procedures. I protected the bank. You protected yourself, Soraya said, quiet but cutting. And I think, Eldon added, that's exactly what got us here. There was a long pause. No one moved. Then Leora, still seated, still quiet, spoke. You didn't ask what my name meant. You didn't ask what school I went to or what award I won. You looked at me and decided something. Her voice was soft, not angry, just steady. I didn't need to be your VIP client. I just needed to be a person. The weight of her words lingered in the room like smoke. No one argued. Finally, Eldon said, Ms. Greaves, effective immediately. Your duties are suspended pending further review. We will proceed with internal investigation. Marla stood, but it wasn't the graceful kind of exit. She gathered her papers too fast, the chair scraping slightly as she pushed it back. Her voice was low, just for the table to hear. You're making a mistake. I've seen worse walk through these doors and get applauded. Marin leaned forward, eyes sharp. Maybe that's the real problem. Marla left the room without another word. Eldon turned to the others. We have work to do, starting with a new policy draft, and we'll need guidance from those who've lived the gaps we missed. He looked to Marin, but then his gaze shifted to Leora, and for once, she didn't look away. The next few days passed with the strange pace that comes after something heavy has finally cracked open. Slow, cautious, full of long stares and whispered conversations behind doors that used to stay open. Inside Fairmont Trust's Greystone branch, the normal hum of business returned, but it wasn't the same. The rhythm was off, like everyone was waiting for a second shoe to drop, and it did. It came not in the form of a press release or a public apology, but in a manila folder handed over by Reggie, the teller who had said almost nothing during the entire ordeal. He showed up at the regional office early that Thursday, standing awkwardly in the waiting area with a folder clutched to his chest like it might burn through his fingers. Eldon Pierce called him into his office personally. I think you should see this, Reggie said, placing the folder on the desk. She gave it to me. Ms. Greaves told me to hold it, not to ask questions, said someone would pick it up later. Eldon opened it. What he found wasn't just internal banking strategy, it was far worse. There were emails, confidential memos, a 3-page analysis comparing client retention numbers between Fairmont Trust and Meridian Financial, and handwritten notes, clearly from Marla, outlining vulnerabilities in Benton and Company's investment model. It wasn't just unethical, it was sabotage. Eldon didn't speak for a full minute. Then he closed the folder slowly and leaned back in his chair. You've done the right thing, Reggie, he said. The teller looked down at his shoes. I didn't at first. Then start now, Eldon replied. By noon, legal had been looped in. By 3 p.m., Marla's access to all internal systems was revoked. Her name was scrubbed from the internal directory before the end of the day. That evening, Marin received a call. Corporate's moving forward with formal action, Eldon said on the other end, and we're launching a full compliance audit, not just at Greystone, but across the region. Good, Marin said, but what about the rest? We're rewriting the policy, he told her. Not just a code of conduct, something bigger, something that starts where this story did. Marin paused. Then you know where it needs to begin. I do. The next morning, Soraya stood in front of a modest podium in the same conference room where she had once only been a quiet witness. Today, she wasn't taking notes. She was leading the first listening session. Employees from all levels sat in folding chairs. Tellers, branch managers, compliance staff. No fancy catered lunch, no forced team-building slogans. Just space and stories. She shared hers. I've been in this industry since I was 22, she said, voice low but clear. I've poured coffee for men who wouldn't make eye contact. I've been asked to smile while being accused, and I've been silent when I should have spoken. I regret that. She looked up, scanning the room. But not this time. One woman in the back wiped her eyes. A man in a green polo nodded slowly, jaw clenched. The silence that followed was heavier than applause. It was respect. Later that afternoon, Leora sat at her kitchen table, flipping through her journal. The same folder she'd carried into the bank now held a copy of the draft policy, Equal Service Protocol, At the top of the second page, under Core Values, was a sentence she'd written in pencil just 2 days before. Treat every name like it belongs here. Her mom walked in, carrying 2 mugs of tea. You ready? Marin asked. Leora didn't look up. Almost. She was still processing it all. The meeting, the fallout, the way Marla's face had changed when the truth caught up to her. Leora didn't feel triumphant. She didn't even feel angry anymore. She just felt steady. They want me to come speak, she said quietly, at the academy, about what happened. Marin placed the mug down beside her. You thinking about it? Leora nodded. Yeah, I am. Outside, the trees had started to turn, soft reds and golds creeping into the leaves. Autumn had arrived, quiet but undeniable, like the truth itself. Leora picked up the draft policy again. Her fingers rested on her own name, now listed under community advisors. She smiled, not wide, not for show, but the kind of smile that builds from inside. The kind that says, I know who I am, and I know what I did. Then she closed the folder and got ready to speak. The morning of the school assembly, Leora woke before the sun. The house was still dark, except for the soft hum of the fridge and the gentle tapping of tree branches against her window. She lay there for a moment, eyes open, heart steady but full. Not anxious, not afraid. Just aware that today mattered. Downstairs, her mom was already in the kitchen, slicing fruit and pouring coffee like it was any other Friday. But when Leora came down the stairs, dressed in her blazer and flats, Marin paused. You don't have to do this if you're not ready, she said, her voice soft but serious. I know, Leora replied, but I think I am. They didn't say much after that. They didn't need to. At Ascend Preparatory Academy, the gym had been converted into an auditorium. Fold-out chairs lined the floor. A small stage had been assembled under the school crest, flanked by flags and string lights that flickered gently overhead. Most of the students filed in without knowing exactly why they'd been called together. There'd been rumors about Leora, about the bank, about something going viral online, but no one had all the facts. That was about to change. Principal Gardner stepped up to the mic first, clearing his throat with the formality of a man who hadn't wanted to be caught in the middle of any of this. We're gathered here today, he began, to hear from one of our own. Leora Benton has asked to speak. I trust we can all offer her the attention and respect she deserves. He stepped aside. And just like that, Leora was up there, alone, under the lights. She didn't bring notes. She didn't need them. When I walked into that bank last week, she said, I wasn't thinking about changing anything. I was just trying to deposit a check. She paused. I had my ID, my award letter, everything I needed, but none of it mattered, not to them. A few heads turned in the crowd. Someone whispered, but no one spoke aloud. I sat in a chair for over an hour while people who came in after me were helped and sent on their way. I was told to wait. I wasn't offered a reason. I wasn't offered kindness. Her voice stayed calm, but her words hit hard. And I realized it didn't matter how prepared I was or how polite I was. The only thing that seemed to matter was how I looked. There was a stillness in the room now. Not tension, not discomfort, just attention. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't think anyone would believe me, but someone did. Someone who saw it and didn't stay silent. And then I found my voice. She looked around, meeting the eyes of students she barely knew. Some who had spoken to her in class, others who hadn't ever looked her way. She wasn't asking for pity. She wasn't asking for applause. I'm not sharing this to get revenge, she said. I'm sharing it because silence protects systems that were never built for people like me. And I think we're past the point of pretending that's okay. No one moved. Then slowly, a hand clapped in the back row. Then another, and another. The applause grew, not loud or wild, but real, grounded. After the assembly, Leora stood near the stage as students came up, one by one. Some offered hugs. Others just nodded. A few whispered thank you. One girl, Samira, from her math class, looked at her with wide eyes and said, That made me feel seen. Leora smiled. Back at home that evening, she sat on the porch with her mom, the two of them wrapped in soft blankets, sipping tea as the last of the autumn light disappeared behind the trees. "I'm proud of you," Marin said. Leora didn't respond right away. She watched a squirrel race along the fence line, watched the wind ruffle the gold leaves that had begun to carpet the yard. "I'm proud of me too," she said finally, and for once it didn't feel like something she had to earn. It just was. A few days later, Leora found herself standing in a place she never expected to be. A room full of strangers, older faces, professionals with lanyards, clipboards, and press badges. It wasn't a school gym or a classroom. It was the Greystone Community Center, where community leaders, educators, and financial institutions had gathered for what was being called a town conversation on equity and trust. At the front of the room, there was a stage, modest but well lit. Folding chairs stretched out in rows. Someone had placed a small table with water and name placards. Hers read, "Leora Benton, student and scholarship recipient." She read it twice, slowly. It still felt strange to be a speaker, not just someone who had lived through something. Across the room, her mom was deep in conversation with two reporters. Soraya stood near the side, flipping through her notes, her usual scarf neatly folded at her collar. A few staffers from Fairmont Trust sat in the front row, including Eldon Pierce. Leora's name had been printed in the event flyer. Her story had been mentioned in 3 local news outlets. Someone had even started a hashtag #SeenHeardLeora, and it had caught on. But none of that felt quite as real as standing behind that podium, staring into a room full of eyes waiting to listen. When they introduced her, the applause was warm but brief. She stepped up, adjusted the mic, and took a breath. "I didn't expect to be here," she began, "and honestly, I didn't want to be known for what happened at a bank." That got a few nods from the front row. But sometimes the moment you didn't ask for is the one that asks something of you. She paused, let it land. "I went in to deposit a check. That's it. I had everything I needed. But I left with something more complicated. The understanding that being prepared doesn't always protect you, and that sometimes people are quicker to question your presence than your paperwork." There was no anger in her voice, just clarity. Someone in that room saw me. She didn't know me, but she knew what she was seeing. And because of her, I found the courage to say what I hadn't even fully named yet. Soraya met her gaze from across the room. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were warm. "I'm not an activist. I'm not an expert. I'm a student. But I know what it feels like to be dismissed, and I know what it feels like to finally be heard. And I think we all deserve the second one more often." When Leora stepped back from the mic, the applause was louder, longer, but still she didn't smile for the crowd. She smiled because something inside her had clicked into place. Later, while refreshments were being served and conversations hummed around the room, a woman approached her, mid-60s, white hair in a neat twist, a faded tote slung over one shoulder. "I'm Sylvia," she said, holding out her hand. "I worked in banking for 35 years. Leora shook her hand gently. "I just wanted to say," Sylvia continued, "we saw things back then, and we didn't always speak up. I wish I had. You reminded me that it's never too late to start." Leora blinked. The words hit deeper than she expected. "Thank you." From across the room, Eldon Pierce made his way over. He looked more tired than usual, but also lighter somehow. "You've changed the way we look at service," he said, not trying to flatter her, but to acknowledge something bigger. "We're not just rewriting our policy, we're rewriting how we train, how we listen." He reached into his coat pocket and handed her a document. It was the finalized version of the Equal Service Protocol, with a dedication page at the front, inspired by Leora Benton, who asked for fairness, not favors. She didn't say anything at first, just held it, feeling the weight of it. The paper wasn't heavy, but the meaning was. Before the event ended, Soraya joined her outside under the fading afternoon sun. "You were brilliant," she said simply. "I was honest," Leora replied. "Same thing," Soraya said with a small smile. They stood in silence for a bit. Cars passed. Someone nearby laughed. The world moved on. But something in Leora had shifted forever. She wasn't just the girl who sat waiting too long in a bank lobby. She was the girl who stood up and kept standing. And now she had a platform. not to speak for everyone, but to make sure no one sat in silence the way she once did. The lobby at Fairman Trust's downtown branch looked different than the one in Greystone. It was sleeker, taller, like the air inside was thinner, meant only for people who spoke in quiet tones and wore shoes that didn't squeak. Leora stood near the entrance, her coat still buttoned, hands deep in her pockets. She wasn't here on business. She hadn't been invited. But she had every right to be here. She scanned the room once, then again. She didn't see Marla Greaves right away, but she knew she would. Marin was in a nearby meeting with the legal team, and Soraya was giving a talk 2 floors up. Leora had come down here alone, her footsteps quiet on the marble. And then she saw her. Marla stood near the teller line, not in her old crisp blazer, but in something softer, plain, understated. Her posture was smaller now, a little more uncertain. She didn't look up at first, too focused on whatever she was tucking into a manila envelope. Leora walked up slowly. Marla turned, and their eyes met. For a moment, neither said a word. Leora spoke first. "I didn't expect to see you here." Marla looked down at the envelope in her hand, then back at her. "I'm cleaning out my file. They've made it official." Leora nodded once. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. "You're not here to say anything else?" Marla asked, her voice low. "No victory speech?" Leora tilted her head. "I didn't win anything. I just showed up." Marla exhaled through her nose, almost a laugh, but not quite. "You know, I used to think silence was strength, that if I kept everything in order, my tone, my clothes, my numbers, no one could touch me." She looked past Leora toward the hallway leading to the office she no longer occupied. "But that only works if you don't notice who you're stepping over." Leora didn't reply. She didn't need to. Marla continued, her eyes softer now, less guarded. "When I saw you that day, I didn't see you. I saw a risk. I saw noise. I saw someone who might shake the routine I'd built for myself." "And now?" Leora asked. Marla sighed, her fingers tightening on the envelope. "Now I see someone who made me look in a mirror I'd avoided for too long." It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was close enough to the truth that Leora let the silence settle between them. She could have said more. She could have told Marla how much that day had hurt, how it had followed her home and clung to her like smoke. But instead she asked, "What are you going to do now?" Marla looked out the tall windows. Outside, the city was moving, cars rolling past, people crossing streets, their lives untouched by this conversation. "I'm not sure," she said, "but I think I need to start listening to people I used to dismiss." Leora nodded, not in approval, just in understanding. She turned to leave but paused. "You may not have seen me that day," she said, voice steady, "but I saw you." Marla blinked, caught off guard. "And I'll remember you, not because of what you did," Leora added, "but because you had the chance to pretend it didn't happen. And you didn't." For the first time, Marla's eyes shimmered. She didn't wipe them. She didn't speak. Leora walked away, shoulders relaxed, breath even. Outside, the cold air kissed her cheeks. She pulled her coat tighter and headed toward the crosswalk, the sound of her footsteps lost in the hum of the city. Behind her, Marla remained in the lobby, alone with her folder, but no longer hiding. The sunlight streamed in through the tall windows of Fairman Trust's central office. It landed gently across the long oak table where Leora sat, her palms flat against the surface. The official printed copy of the Equal Service Protocol spread out before her. She read every word slowly, deliberately. Not because she didn't understand it, but because she wanted to feel the weight of it. This wasn't just a document anymore. It was her voice translated into policy. To her left sat Marin, quiet but present, giving her the space to lead. On her right was Soraya, wearing a pin with silver wings, one she used to wear on flights, now tucked into the lapel of her navy blazer. Across from them sat Eldon Pierce, tired around the eyes but grounded. The past few weeks had been heavy for everyone, but today wasn't about the past. It was about choosing what came next. "You ready?" Eldon asked gently. Leora didn't respond right away. She reached for the pen beside the document. Not a ceremonial pen, not gold-plated or engraved, Just a simple black ink pen, the kind you'd find in a drawer or a school bag. She signed. First her name, then the date. A quiet passed through the room like a breath finally exhaled. Eldon nodded. It's official. The Equal Service Protocol was now adopted across all Fairmont Trust branches, starting immediately. It included new training standards, accountability checklists, and a public reporting option for customer concerns. But more than that, it required managers and employees to review real-world scenarios, including one called the Benton case. Leora looked up. I didn't expect to feel this calm. That's what happened, Soraya said, when something broken finally gets its name. Reporters weren't invited to the meeting, but word had already spread. Community organizations were already calling it a model for responsible reform. A few even reached out to Leora, asking if she would help them draft similar standards. She wasn't sure what to say to them yet. After the signing, the three of them walked down the hallway together. Leora, Marin, and Soraya. The building buzzed with quiet conversation. A few employees glanced up as they passed, recognizing her, but not gawking. More like respecting. They reached the main lobby just as a school field trip of middle schoolers was passing through the plaza outside. Leora paused at the glass doors, watching them laugh and talk and trip over each other's feet. One girl in the group looked like her. Same curls, same wide eyes, same unsure energy. She was staring up at the building like it was too big, too shiny, too unreachable. Leora smiled. I used to feel that way, she murmured. Soraya stepped beside her. Not anymore? No, Leora said. Now I know it was never too big. They just never built it for me to walk in comfortably. Marin looked at her daughter, her pride quiet, woven deep into every glance. They stepped outside, letting the door close behind them. A few steps from the exit, a journalist from the Greystone Weekly approached. Notebook in hand, recorder clipped to her coat. Ms. Benton, she said, directing the question carefully toward Leora, not her mother. Do you mind if I ask, what's next for you? Leora paused. The wind tugged lightly at the edge of her coat. I think, she said slowly, I'm going to keep showing up where they don't expect me. She didn't mean it as a challenge. She meant it as a promise. The reporter smiled, scribbled something down, and stepped back. As they walked toward the car, Leora glanced at the building one last time. Not to remember the pain, but to mark the change. Because something had changed. Not everything. Not the world. But this room. This hallway. This name on the policy. And for now, that was enough. A month had passed. The leaves had all but let go of the trees, carpeting the sidewalks in burnt oranges and dusty golds. Greystone had settled into late autumn, the kind where the air was cold, but the sunlight was kind. Leora sat at her bedroom desk, her window cracked just slightly to let in the cool breeze. The Equal Service Protocol was framed on the wall beside her, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A line drawn in ink that had once lived in silence. In front of her sat a blank page on her laptop, the blinking cursor waiting patiently. The essay she was writing was for a student-led journal at Westridge Academy. Its theme, Moments That Changed Us. She'd titled hers, Ripples. The first line came easily now. I walked into the bank that day thinking I was just depositing a check. I left knowing I had challenged something much bigger than policy. Downstairs, her mother was on a call with a foundation director, someone asking if Leora might be willing to speak at a conference in D.C. next spring. There were emails from student groups, think tanks, even a podcast producer who wanted to hear her story in her own words. But Leora hadn't said yes to any of them. Not yet. She didn't want to become a symbol. She didn't want to be turned into a headline or a talking point. She just wanted to stay honest. And for now, that meant writing this, on her own time, in her own words. She wrote about the quiet humiliation, about how long those marble floors felt under her shoes. She wrote about Soraya, the way a single steady voice can make you feel seen when the whole room turns its back. She wrote about Marla, not as a villain, but as a woman who had let fear and habit guide her. Someone who had been so focused on holding her place that she forgot to make space. And she wrote about what came after. Not the policies, not the applause, but the small things. The kids at school who smiled differently now. The cashier at the pharmacy who remembered her name. The email from Sylvia, the retired banker, who had started mentoring 2 young interns at her old firm. Those were the ripples, the things she couldn't measure, but could feel. When she finished the final paragraph, she leaned back in her chair and let the silence fill the room. A peaceful kind this time. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt steady. From the hallway, her mom knocked gently. "You hungry?" Leora smiled. "In a bit." She turned back to her screen, reread the last sentence. One girl walked into a bank with a folder in her hand and left with a door pushed open behind her. Not for herself, but for whoever needed to walk through next. She hit save. And for the first time since that day, she didn't feel like she was reacting to the world. She felt like she was shaping it. The December wind swept gently across Greystone's town square, twirling little spirals of fallen leaves past the old library and around the base of the flagpole. The community center stood quiet and warm under strings of holiday lights, its windows glowing softly in the early dusk. Inside, a quiet crowd gathered. Neighbors, students, teachers, a few bank employees, and folks who had never met Leora Benton, but had followed her story from the corner of their morning papers or whispered it across kitchen tables. Tonight's event wasn't a press conference or a rally. It was a story circle. And Leora had agreed to speak. No stage, no microphones, just a circle of folding chairs and a room full of people who had come to listen. Soraya was seated near the back, coat draped over her lap, hands resting on her knees. Marin stood against the wall, arms crossed loosely, her smile quiet but unmistakably proud. Even Eldon Pierce had shown up. No clipboard this time, no suit jacket. Just a scarf, a thermos of tea, and a willingness to sit in the second row. Leora walked to the center, holding nothing but a folded sheet of notebook paper. She didn't unfold it. "I've been asked a lot over the past few weeks," she began, "what I've learned." She looked around the room, faces of all colors, all ages, some curious, some teary, some thoughtful. And for a while, I didn't know how to answer, because most of what happened to me wasn't new. Not really. People have been ignored, dismissed, and questioned for a long time. I just happened to be one of the few who had people watching. A few heads nodded, a quiet shuffle of feet. "But if there's one thing I know now," she continued, "it's that your voice doesn't have to be loud to make an impact. It just has to last. It has to stay." She paused. "Mine almost didn't. That day at the bank, I almost left. I almost said nothing. I almost believed that I was the problem. But then someone spoke to me, not with a speech, not with anger, but with a whisper that said, 'You're not wrong. I see it too.'" Her eyes landed on Soraya, whose own gaze didn't waver. "I think we underestimate what one voice can do. Not just the kind that speaks truth, but the kind that listens for it too." She folded the paper again. She hadn't read from it once. The room was still, wrapped in something heavier than applause, something more lasting, understanding. Afterward, people lingered. No one rushed out. Conversations bloomed in the corners. Coffee was poured into paper cups. 2 high schoolers approached Leora to ask if she'd help them start a student equity group. An elderly man thanked her for reminding him how much listening mattered. A middle-aged mother quietly whispered that her daughter had watched Leora's interview 3 times and now wanted to go into law. As the room slowly emptied, Leora stood by the door, holding her coat, her voice still echoing gently in her chest. Soraya joined her. "You did more than tell a story," she said softly. "You planted something." Leora glanced out the window, where snow had begun to fall, thin, slow flakes catching in the streetlights. "I hope it grows." "It already is." Before they parted, Soraya reached into her coat pocket and handed Leora a small envelope. "Open it later." Leora nodded. They hugged, not long, not tight, but the kind that lingers long after it ends. Back home in the quiet of her room, Leora opened the envelope. Inside was a single note card, handwritten, careful. It read, "Some voices echo. Yours builds bridges." She placed the card beside her framed equal service protocol. Then she sat at her desk, opened her notebook, and began a new page. The world didn't change overnight, but I learned how to carry my voice into rooms that weren't expecting me. And I plan to keep walking in, not to prove I belong, but to make sure the next person never has to. She closed the notebook, feeling the warmth of her own words settle in her chest. Outside, the snow fell quietly, and inside, her voice stayed. And maybe that's the real power of this story, not just in what Leora said, but in how many people started listening differently because of her. So now we ask you, have you ever stayed silent when you should have spoken up? Or witnessed something wrong and didn't know what to do? We'd love to hear your story in the comments. Your voice might be the one that helps someone else speak up tomorrow. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think, don't forget to subscribe. There are more stories like Leora's, real, powerful, and deeply human, waiting to be told.